Hey everybody, today I want to talk about an album that maybe a lot of you don't really know that much about, and honestly, I didn't really know much about it either until about a year or two ago. And this is an album by Fleetwood Mac, and it's called Kiln. Now, this is an album by Fleetwood Mac that was recorded in 1970, and it's right after their original guitar player Peter Green left the band. Fleetwood Mac's kind of an interesting band because they had kind of four different phases. Their first phase was their blues, British blues rock phase with Peter Green. And then after that was this phase with two guitar players, Jeremy Spencer and I think Danny Kirwan was his name. And then after that, there was a phase with Bob Welch. And then, of course, the most famous Fleetwood Mac phase was when Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined the band. And that's, of course, when they recorded Rumors and the album Tusk and just had a bunch of radio hits. But before all of that, they had this small time period where they had Jeremy Spencer and Danny Kirwan. And this is an album that both of those two guitar players play on. This album is also the very first Fleetwood Mac album that has Christine McVie playing on it. She plays some keyboard parts and sings backing vocals. In addition, she also designed this album cover, which is very, very cool. Now, like I said, this is an album that I think a lot of people aren't really that familiar with. I mean, everybody knows the name Fleetwood Mac, but this is really a hidden gem in my opinion, because it's just kind of of all the phases of Fleetwood Mac, this is definitely the phase that I think gets the most overlooked. I think, obviously, the most famous phase of Fleetwood Mac is with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. And then coming up very close, second is the Peter Green Fleetwood Mac. And then third would be the Bob Welch Fleetwood Mac. And then this phase, I think, would definitely be the least well-known of all of Fleetwood Mac's phases. But I think there's a lot of really, really great features about this phase in Fleetwood Mac's career. Now, this album, oddly enough, it has a very, very Buddy Holly influence all over it. It's got a lot of early kind of rockabilly sounds, has a lot of kind of three-chord kind of singer-songwriting type stuff on this album. And that really comes from Jeremy Spencer. I guess he was on a bit kind of rockabilly phase at that point in his musical career. And that shows up a lot on this album. But those songs are really fun, and actually a lot of them are really, really good. Then the other guitar player, Danny Kirwan, his songs are very heartfelt and just have a lot of soul in them. And I really, really like those songs a lot. In fact, I think those songs on this album are my favorite. Especially a song called Station Man. Station Man is the second song on this album, and to me it's the best song on the whole record, and it's so, so good. This particular pressing is a US pressing, but it's a very early pressing. It's on the Reprise label, on the tan Reprise label. And the stampers on this are very early. You got A1 on side 1, and you have B1 on side 2. So those are very, very early stampers, and they sound excellent. This is an excellent sounding record. And really, maybe a lot of you out there are wondering, why is he talking about this Fleetwood Mac album that no one really ever talks about? The reason I am is because I remember stumbling upon this album about a year ago and really, really enjoying it, and thinking to myself, when I do my website, I want to have certain albums on here that are hidden gems. Records that people who are starting to collect records may have never heard about, or people who already have a lot of records are trying to look for albums that they haven't heard yet, and they want to give them a try, and something that might become just one of their favorite albums. It's kind of along the lines of when I was talking about the Graham Nash album, Songs for Beginners. This is kind of one of those albums where it's an album that you've seen a lot in record stores, but you've probably just never heard it. And it's just a very, very, very good album, and an album that I think is well worth listening to and adding to anyone's collection. So this one is on my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com. It's on there right now. It's for a very, very good price. If this is an album you want to add to your collection, head to the website, check it out. I also wanted to mention that I just listed this Paul McCartney album. Now, this is Paul McCartney's Russian album, and The story behind this, I won't go that much into this because I'm sure this is a record that a lot of people have seen. I know when I go to record stores, I see millions and millions of copies of this album in record stores. But since I always hear so many copies, I started picking a bunch up to try to find the best pressing. And this one happens to be the best of, I think I got about 8 different pressings, and this is definitely the best one. So the backstory on this album is that in the late 80s, Paul McCartney wanted to make an album that was just for the people of Russia. So he made this album of all rock and roll standards, and it was released just in Russia. But of course, it's Paul McCartney, and people all over the world wanted this album. They want anything by Paul McCartney. So this album was imported to the UK and the US, and eventually it actually did get a proper release in the UK and the US. But this happens to be one of the earlier ones, and it is on this Russian/MPL record label, as you can see right here. And this album had a bunch of different releases in the sense of different track listings and stuff like that. This happens to be the 13-track album. There was, I think the first album only had 11 tracks on it. This one has 13. And it just sounds really, really good. And these are just standard rock and roll songs that Paul McCartney recorded in the late 80s with not a lot of fuss. And it's just a really fun album. And it's kind of just a weird, kind of curious addition to Paul McCartney's discography. So if you don't have it, it's definitely worth owning. It's a fun listen. And yeah, you can find this one on my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com. And again, this one is also up there for a very, very good price. So check out these 2 albums, this one by Fleetwood Mac and this one by Paul McCartney, on my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com. And also check out the other albums on there right now, including a bunch of albums by Led Zeppelin, and a bunch of other great artists as well. So go on there, do a search, see if there's a record on there that might interest you. And hey, that's it for now. So we'll talk to you all later. Bye for now.